Welcome to Have You Read It, the channel where we bring books to life, one summary at a time. Today we're exploring a fascinating and timely work. The Russian Way of Deterrence, Strategic Culture, Coercion, and War by Dmitry Adamsky. This book isn't just a dry academic text, it's a deep dive into the Russian psyche, exploring how their history, culture, and worldview shape their approach to coercion in international relations. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's define some key terms. Coercion, in its simplest form, is trying to get someone to do something they don't want to do by threatening them. It has two main flavors: deterrence, which is preventing someone from acting, and compellence, which is forcing someone to act or stop acting. Think of deterrence as saying, don't even think about crossing this line, and compellence as saying, you better start doing this or else. Adamsky argues that Russia's approach to coercion is unique, a blend of nuclear saber-rattling, conventional military posturing, and informational warfare, all seasoned with a distinct cultural flavor. He calls this deterrence à la Russe, reflecting the Russian tendency to use deterrence as an umbrella term for all forms of coercive diplomacy. So, how did we get here? The book traces the evolution of Russian deterrence thinking, starting from its surprising rejection during the Soviet era. Unlike the West, which embraced deterrence theory early in the Cold War, the Soviets didn't really develop a sophisticated doctrine around it. They had nuclear weapons, of course, and understood the concept of mutually assured destruction, but they never truly accepted the idea of a limited nuclear war. Their military doctrine was all about winning, even a nuclear war, a concept that clashed with the Western idea of deterrence as a way to prevent war altogether. The fall of the Soviet Union changed everything. Suddenly, Russia found itself in a position of conventional military weakness compared to the West. Their nuclear arsenal, once intended for warfighting, became the primary tool of deterrence. This led to a knowledge crisis, as Russian military thinkers scrambled to understand how to use nuclear weapons not to fight a war, but to prevent one. This is where things get interesting. With limited conventional options, Russia began to view its nuclear arsenal as an equalizer, a way to deter not just nuclear attacks, but conventional ones as well. This concept, which became known in the West as regional nuclear deterrence, or escalate to de-escalate, relies on the idea that a limited nuclear strike could deter or de-escalate a conventional conflict. As Russia modernized its conventional forces in the early 2000s, particularly after the 2008 war with Georgia, its approach to deterrence expanded beyond the nuclear realm. They started thinking about strategic deterrence, a concept that integrates nuclear, conventional, and informational capabilities into a single unified system. This approach is not about overwhelming force, but about manipulating the adversary's perceptions, creating a situation where the costs of action outweigh the benefits, regardless of the specific tools used. Think of it as a multi-pronged approach: the threat of nuclear escalation, the potential for devastating conventional strikes, and the constant pressure of disinformation campaigns all working together. The book also highlights how Russia's strategic culture significantly influences its deterrence behavior. Adamsky describes Russian strategic culture as having a holistic or systemic approach. They tend to see things as interconnected, preferring to look at the big picture rather than focusing on individual elements. This cultural trait helps explain their embrace of cross-domain coercion, where they seamlessly blend different forms of power to achieve their goals. Another key aspect of Russian strategic culture is the disconnection between theory and practice. While Russian military thinkers can develop sophisticated theories, actually implementing them has historically been a challenge. This gap between theory and practice can lead to incoherence in their deterrence posture, as advanced theoretical concepts aren't always backed by the necessary capabilities. Imagine a beautifully designed car that unfortunately lacks an engine. Russian military culture also emphasizes the psychological aspects of warfare. They prioritize morale, fighting spirit, and psychological resilience, viewing these as key to victory. This focus on the psychological translates to their approach to deterrence, where manipulating the adversary's perceptions and will is central to their strategy. The book explores concepts that inform Russian thinking on deterrence. Reflexive control, a Soviet-era concept, focuses on manipulating the adversary's perception of reality to make them act in predictable and beneficial ways. While not directly equivalent to deterrence, reflexive control emphasizes the importance of perception management, a key element of the Russian approach. Another influential concept is military cunningness, which involves using deception, disinformation, and indirect action to exploit the adversary's weaknesses. This concept is closely related to maskirovka, the Russian art of military deception, which encompasses everything from camouflage to propaganda. Active measures, another Soviet-era legacy, refer to a range of clandestine operations designed to influence foreign governments, organizations, and individuals. These measures can include disinformation campaigns, political interference, and even targeted violence, all aimed at shaping the strategic environment in Russia's favor. The book also draws parallels between contemporary Russian deterrence theory and historical concepts like systematic combat activities, which emphasizes persistent engagement with the adversary, even during periods of relative peace. This persistent engagement can be seen as a form of cumulative coercion, where smaller-scale actions build up a deterring potential that can be leveraged later. Imagine it like constantly poking a bear. Eventually, it's going to react. Finally, the book touches on the influence of figures like Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov and concepts like reasonable sufficiency on the development of Russian deterrence thinking. Ogarkov's vision of a future war dominated by reconnaissance strike complexes laid the groundwork for Russia's emphasis on long-range precision strikes, while reasonable sufficiency, initially a concept for managing defense spending, influenced their approach to calibrating damage in deterrence operations. But how effective is deterrence à la Russe? The book acknowledges that assessing the success of coercion is incredibly difficult. There's no easy way to prove a direct cause and effect relationship between a coercive action and the adversary's behavior. Did they back down because of the threat, or for some other reason? It's a question that often goes unanswered. Adamsky argues that Russian practitioners, while skilled at identifying Western vulnerabilities, sometimes struggle to communicate their signals effectively. This can lead to misinterpretations and unintended escalation, as the adversary misreads Russia's intentions. It's like speaking different languages. Even if you're saying the same words, the meaning can get lost in translation. The book also raises the concept of the culmination point of coercion. This is the point at which further threats or use of force become counterproductive, leading to escalation or other unintended consequences. It's the moment when pushing too hard backfires spectacularly. Looking at the war in Ukraine through the lens of Adamsky's book offers several preliminary insights. The invasion can be seen as a forceful phase of a prolonged coercive campaign that began in late 2021. The Kremlin's initial demands, backed by military posturing, aimed to deter Ukraine from further integration with the West and compel the U.S. to negotiate a new security architecture for Europe. When these efforts failed, the Kremlin resorted to forceful coercion. The war also highlights the continued importance of nuclear signaling in Russian deterrence strategy. Moscow's explicit and implicit nuclear threats aim to deter direct NATO intervention and limit Western military aid to Ukraine. The use of dual-use weapon systems, those capable of delivering both conventional and nuclear warheads, further reinforces the nuclear dimension of their coercive strategy. The effectiveness of Russia's coercive strategy in Ukraine is a complex question with no easy answers. While they succeeded in deterring direct NATO involvement, their efforts to compel Ukraine and the West to accept their demands have largely failed. The war has also led to significant unintended consequences for Russia, including increased Western military support for Ukraine, tighter sanctions, and greater NATO unity. The war also raises questions about the culmination point of coercion. Did Russia miscalculate by escalating to a full-scale invasion? Or did the West cross the line by refusing to negotiate and providing Ukraine with increasingly sophisticated weaponry? These are crucial questions for understanding the dynamics of the conflict and the future of deterrence in Europe. Looking ahead, the book identifies several key areas for future research. These include the role of preventive war in Russian strategic thought, the impact of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence on coercion, the evolution of informational coercion, and the interplay between religion and deterrence. These are all crucial areas for understanding the evolving nature of Russian deterrence and its implications for international security. Now let's summarize the main takeaways and heuristics from The Russian Way of Deterrence. Deterrence à la Russe is holistic and cross-domain. Russia integrates nuclear, conventional, and informational capabilities into a single coercive strategy. Perception management is central. Russia prioritizes manipulating the adversary's perceptions and will. Cumulative coercion. Russia uses persistent, low-level engagement to build up a deterring potential. Strategic culture matters. Russia's history, culture, and worldview shape its approach to coercion. Assessing effectiveness is crucial and difficult. Understanding the culmination point of coercion is essential to avoid unintended consequences. So, the next time you hear about Russian military activity or information operations, remember these points. They offer a valuable framework for understanding the complex and often confusing world of Russian deterrence. Thanks for watching. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next book dive.